Okay, guys, let's have a look at this TOWS matrix. I introduced this last week insofar as your assignment goes in saying that, yes, while we're talking about a SWOT analysis, great, do a SWOT analysis and, boxes sort of ticked. But if you want to do really well, let's bring this SWOT analysis and let's put it on steroids, right? Let's really do a good analysis of the information in your assignment. So the example that I spoke about last week was that SWOT analysis on steroids is because often what we have is in boardrooms, and I've been in them, and I've heard people talk about SWOT analysis and they pull it out and you're beating your head against a brick wall when individuals are listing a whole load of different strengths of the company and never once throughout the entire presentation have they referred to the competition. So one often thing that you see time and time again was, oh, we have friendly staff. Well, how friendly are the competitor staff? Because if the competition have staff who are friendlier than your staff, well, that's a weakness then. And often, if I had a penny for every time I've been sitting in through a SWOT analysis and heard people talk about strengths without, really doing any sort of benchmark analysis against the competition, I'll be a rich man. It's quite simple. A SWOT analysis is a quite a remedial tool, right? And it's predominantly remedial because it's a brainstorming or listing exercise, which is fine. Okay, that's fine. That's not the issue that I have here. It's fine for a brainstorming and a listing exercise. But the reason why I'm not a fan of it is because people are not doing it correctly, because they're not comparing it to competition, right? Now, with that in mind, I don't really get into talking very much in any of my classes about what a SWOT analysis is, right? Just list your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your threats, right? And there's ways to conduct that analysis, and we're getting into that. But what I do spend time on with my students is focusing on the TOWS matrix, because you cannot discuss the TOWS matrix without discussing SWOT, right? So let's do that. So I don't want to see students put together a SWOT analysis. What I want students to do is to do a TOWS matrix, put together a TOWS matrix. And if you do that, not only are you demonstrating your knowledge of SWOT, but you're also showing better analytical skills, right? Because this particular conceptual framework looks at relationships between your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your threats, right? So anyway, this paper, written back in 1982, has been cited 1,480 times. It has had a huge impact in the community. Now, the paper which Heinz Viereck published, almost 30 years ago, was doing two things, right? And it's the second thing that we're mostly interested here, is looking at he's introduced the TOWS matrix for matching the environmental threats and opportunities with the company's weaknesses, especially its strengths. Right. And what he says is that this systematically identifies relationships between these factors and basing strategies on them. Right. So this is it. This is the application. This allows you to put together strategies, which is really useful for your assignment, because that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to put together a marketing strategy, and we're proposing a marketing strategy, right? Or elements of it, at least in the first assignment. So this is why I think this will be much more valuable to you. Right, so as I mentioned, it's a conceptual framework, and I have it highlighted here. These highlights won't appear up on the contents page. Not the contents page. No, our course content page. Anyway, let's just move on. Okay, so those highlights are not going to appear. I've just put these down here tonight for you guys so you can get an idea of the important stuff, and I'm drawing your attention to where the important stuff is. Right, so what is a TOW matrix? It's a conceptual framework for a systematic analysis that facilitates the matching the external threats and opportunities with the internal weaknesses, strengths of the organization. That's what it is in a nutshell. All right, now this here is what it looks like, right? This here's what it's looked like. Now, as I said, this is quite a complex looking grid, but what we're essentially looking for is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 boxes, right? 8 boxes. These are known, the ones down here, your opportunities and your threats, right? Your opportunities and your threats. These here are considered external factors. Up here, we have internal factors, right? This is the internal environment. Okay, let me just say something as well. There's way more to the internal environment than just these two, right? But for now, let's focus on this, right? So here we have the internal factors, your internal strengths and your weaknesses. Now, quite simply, the way this works, and I'm going to jump down a little bit, I'm going to jump back, all right? So what I've done here is the function of this is to identify strategies, tactics, and actions. And there are a number of these, right? There are 4 of these, right? 4 of these strategies. Strategy 1, strategy 2, strategy 3, and strategy 4. Now, here we go, strategies, right? This is the first one. We talked about the mini, which is minimize, right? Now, what he says here is, we look at the minimize one, the WT strategy, which is your weaknesses and your threats, is to minimize both of these. You've got to minimize your weaknesses and minimize your threats. And he gives a description here. In general, the aim of the WT strategy is to minimize both weaknesses and threats. A company faced with external threats and internal weaknesses may indeed be in a precarious position. In fact, such a firm may have to fight for its survival or may even have to choose liquidation. But there are, of course, other choices. For example, such a firm may prefer a merger or may cut back its operations with the intent of either overcoming the weaknesses, hoping that the threat will diminish over time. Right, and he says wishful thinking. Whatever strategy is selected, the WT position is one that any firm will try to avoid. Now, when we go back to here, right? Yeah, I want you to look at this. Your internal weakness and your external threats. So if you've listed your internal weaknesses, what you perceive to be are your weaknesses within your organization, and then you list out here through maybe research or market research, you identify and list a number of external threats. What it's saying here is when you've identified what your threats and what your weaknesses are, you're trying to minimize both of these. Okay, so over here and down to here, this quadrant is that you're looking to minimize these things. Right? So whatever you've listed here, if you've got 3 or 4 weaknesses here and 3 or 4 threats here, your job is to minimize those. That's the strategy. And he's giving you some examples of how to minimize those, right? So that's the first one. Let's move down a little bit further, right? If we look at the WO strategy, which is minimize your weaknesses and maximize your opportunities. The second strategy attempts to minimize the weaknesses and to maximize the opportunities. A company may identify opportunities in the external environment, but have organizational weaknesses which prevent the firm from taking advantage of market demands. For example, an auto accessory company with a great demand for electronic devices to control the amount of timing of fuel injection in a combustion engine may lack the technology required for producing these microprocessors. Right, that's just a specific example. And this article deals with lots of examples from the motor trade. You'll see that if you read it. Okay, one possible strategy would be to acquire this technology through cooperation with a firm having a competency in this field. So you may be really, really, really good at marketing. You may be excellent at branding, at creating brands and creating an identity in the marketplace. And you might be excellent at positioning yourself. But you may not have the technical competencies to deliver on that promise. If we go back to our first lecture about promise management, you may not be able to deliver on that, right? The idea of the part-time marketers. So what we do here is we simply collaborate, right? We join up with another company to help us in that, right? Now, it doesn't always work, but that's one option. An alternative tactic would be to hire and train people with the required technical capabilities. Of course, the firm also has the choice of doing nothing, thus leaving the opportunity to competitors. And that's fine. You know, if you don't have the resources, both financially and in the human resources, to be able to capitalize on opportunity, the worst thing you can do is go for that opportunity. Because what happens is you will make a promise that you can't really deliver on, and you'll end up, delivering out on inferior products, and that will only destroy your image in the marketplace. So sometimes it's better off just to leave it to the competitor, right? So when we go back up here, all right, strategy number 2, the WO strategy is minimize and maximize, right? Minimize and maximize. So we list the opportunities, all the opportunities here, and we list our weaknesses. And the idea here is that with when you identify your weaknesses and you identify your opportunities, you try and minimize your weaknesses by maximizing your opportunities. All right, let's keep going. Right, the next one down then looks at the ST strategy, your strengths and your threat strategy. And what they're saying here is it's a maxi-mini. Maximize your strengths to minimize your threats. This strategy is based on strengths of the organization that can deal with the threats in the environment. The aim is to maximize the former while minimizing the latter. This, however, does not mean that a strong company can meet threats in the external environment head on, as General Motors realized in the 1960s. Mighty GM recognized the potential threat posed by Ralph Nader, who exposed the safety hazards of the Corvair automobile. As will be remembered, the direct confrontation with Mr. Nader caused GM more problems than expected. In retrospect, the initial GM response from strength was probably inappropriate. The lesson to be learned here is that strengths must often be used with great restraint and discretion. Right? So again, we go back to this one. So what we're saying here, in this one here, the strengths and threat strategy is maxi-mini, maximize and minimize your threats and your strengths in this quadrant. That's your strategy. It's found here. Okay, so you put that together. And then the last one, which is what people mostly think of when they think of TOWS Matrix, is here, is the strengths and opportunities one. In other words, your strengths are used to capitalize on your opportunities, right? Maximize both of these. Any company would like to be in a position where it can maximize both their strengths and their opportunities. Such an enterprise can lead from strengths, utilizing resources to take advantage of the market for its products and services. And the example that's written here is about Mercedes-Benz. With a technical know-how and the quality image, they can take advantage of external demand for luxury cars by increasingly affluent public. Successful enterprises, even if they temporarily use one of the three previously mentioned strategies, will attempt to get into a situation where they can work from strengths to take advantage of the opportunities. If they have weaknesses, they will strive to overcome them, making them strengths. If they face threats, they will cope with them so that they can focus on opportunities. All right. So again, we have it. You've listed your strengths, maybe 3-4 strengths that you have, and you've listed your opportunities. Right? And what we're saying here is in this little quadrant, we have trying to maximize both of those. Now, let's move this on a little bit. Okay, let's move this on a little bit. That's all fairly straightforward. Fine. This is about the relationships. With a SWOT analysis, all you're doing is you're listing your strengths, listing your weaknesses, listing your opportunities, and listing your threats. And it stops there. Stops there. No analytical thinking going on at all. And what this does is this brings these together, insofar as you use your strengths to capitalize on your opportunities. So whatever you've identified in your SWOT analysis as being a strength and identifying the opportunities you've identified through market research, you're using your strengths to capitalize on your opportunities. So if one of your strengths, for example, was you had big cash reserves in the bank, you had big cash reserves in the bank, well, you could use that to increase advertising. Because maybe there's, a new player in the marketplace. And what you're essentially going to do is you're going to, smother the market with your brand image. Or what you could even do, if you have quite a nice, revenue generating over the last couple of years and you got cash reserves, well, what you could do is you could actually undercut your competition at a ridiculous low price where they simply can't compete with you. And because you have those cash reserves, you can maintain that for however long you need to. And therefore, the competition just can't compete, because not only are you probably maybe giving a better service or a product, but now you're actually giving a cheaper price as well. And there's no way people are going to be able to compete with that. So you can see how something like your internal strengths, such as a big cash reserve in the bank, can, one, capitalize on opportunities, right? So if the market's grown, or even if you go back to this one, maximize, minimize, you can take your big cash reserve, right? You take your big cash reserve in the bank as one of your strengths, and you can use that to maybe destroy competition who are seen to be listed as a threat. In here, you're maximizing your internal strengths such as cash reserves, to minimize threats, such as competition. So if you knew a new competition was coming on board into your particular geographic location, that's one thing you knew. An ST type of strategy. Okay. Now, let's move on a little bit further, right? So what I wanted to do here is we'll show you this part of it. And in figure 4 in the article, right? So let's just go back here. The complexity of interactions of situational factors. All right, so let's have a look at this. The conceptual model provides a good framework for identifying relationships, but it can become a complex process when many factors are being identified. The matrix shown in figure 4 is an example of one approach to identify combinations of relationships, which in turn may become the basis for strategic choices. Now, this is where this really, helps you. So in this little grid here, figure 4, the plus sign indicates a match between the strengths of a company and the external opportunities, right? That's positive, it's good. While a 0 indicates a weak or non-existent relationship. Analysis of figure 4 indicates that strength number 1, right? Strength number 1 here, see this? Strength number 1 can be matched with several opportunities. Similarly, many strengths can be utilized to exploit opportunity number 7. So if you look at opportunity number 7, yeah, you see that there? And you've got many strengths, plus, 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 plus. So all of those, so these are your 10 strengths you've identified. And what we're saying is those 10 strengths, quite a lot of them, can be used to capitalize on opportunity number 7 that you've identified. So maybe your first strength might have been the cash reserve. A second strength could be your brand recognition in the marketplace. That can also be used to capitalize on the opportunity. And so on and so forth. So whatever strengths that you've identified through market research, those strengths can be used for different opportunities. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We've identified 10 here in this case. And what we're saying in that example is that opportunity number 7 can be capitalized on by the first strength you identified, the second strength you identified, the fourth strength you identified, the fifth strength you can identify, the seventh strength you can identify, the eighth strength you identified, you see what I'm saying? Okay, so this is useful. This is really, really useful to help you show the relationships between SWOT and so on. Okay, now, if people are still lost, right? If you're not getting this at this stage, there are worked examples here, right? So there are lots of worked examples. And I'll just go through some really, really quickly, right? Just really quickly with you. So this was the application of the TOWS Matrix to Volkswagen, all right? Now, what they've identified here in their strengths is strong research and development and engineering, strong sales and service network, efficient production automation capabilities, right? The opportunities that they identified was growing affluent market demands for more luxurious cars with many options, attractive offers to build an assembly plant in the US, Chrysler and American Motors need small engines. Volkswagen, yeah? Think about Volkswagen, a small car, right? So the strengths and the external opportunities here and here, and this is, remember, maximize. It is an SO strategy. These are the SO strategies. Develop and produce a multi-product line with many options in different price classes. And here we have a list of their particular model of cars. So you can see here, opportunity 1, strength 2. So what we're saying is opportunity 1 is a growing affluent marketplace who are demanding more luxurious cars with many options. Opportunity 1. And what they're saying is with opportunity 1, we can use strength number 1 and strength number 2 to capitalize on that. We can use our strong R&D and engineering and our strong sales and service network to capitalize on this growing demand. See how that works? Okay. You can see here, right? The second strategy, the second SO, the second maximize strategy is to build an assembly plant using research and development, engineering, and production automation experience. So opportunity number 2 is attractive offers to build an assembly plant in the USA. And we'll be able to use our strengths from the first strength we identified and the third strength we identified. A strong R&D and engineering department and the efficient production and automation capabilities. And between those two strengths, we can capitalize on the second one. And then the third strategy, SO strategy, is to build engines for Chrysler and AMC, because the opportunity is Chrysler and American Motors are looking for small engines. And we can see that our third strength is efficient production and automation capabilities. I keep tripping up on that word tonight. Automation capabilities. All right. Do you see how all this works? You see how good this tool is? Now, you go back and you think about SWOT. It's like the Ladybird version. Right? This stuff, as I said, is SWOT on steroids. And again, look, go through the rest of the examples and you'll see how this all ties into itself. But what I've done here this evening for you is show you, what TOWS Matrix is, why it's used, and some examples from it. All right. And I've drawn your attention to the important parts of the article. So I've cut down on you having to read the whole thing. Just go to the areas that I've highlighted here this evening. All right. So that there is your TOWS Matrix. Let's see that in your assignment and I'll throw marks at you. Right. I'll throw marks at you. Obviously, if you give me SWOT analysis and don't give me TOWS Matrix, I'm not going to fail you for that section of the assignment. Right. I'm not going to fail you for it. But if you can show me some application of this stuff through the TOWS Matrix, you're going to be rewarded accordingly. Simple as. All right. So there we go, guys. Let's move on to the next part. Okay, people. This is a hugely cited paper. It is cited 33,567 times since 1990. It originally appeared in the Harvard Business Review, and as you can see here, the title of the article is "The Core Competence of the Corporation," and it's a brilliant article to help you understand the idea of what is a competency and a core competency specifically. In a nutshell, a core competency is what the authors say is a harmonized combination of multiple resources and skills that distinguish a firm in the marketplace. Now, the key with this is this idea of a harmonized combination. And we'll get to that in a few minutes, particularly his later paper in 1996. It's really looking at this idea of a specialized knowledge or technique or a skill. And it's the idea of sort of this collective learning across the corporation that's so important. How you develop these core competencies. But as I said, it's this harmonization or this harmonized combination, this collective learning across the firm is really what a core competency is. People often fall into the trap thinking that a core competency is something that you're just good at, right? It's more than that. It's the entire organization. The entire organization have this particular knowledge or technique or skill embedded within its culture. And there's lots and lots of examples in this article, and it's uploaded on their contents page, that you can read about. Some companies have an absolute core competency in sales and marketing, and some of the companies that I've worked for prior to entering academia would have sales and marketing as their core competency. And we'll get into looking at what exactly that is. Now, your job and your assignment with your competencies is to identify whatever business you're looking at is the core competencies within them. Now, you're not going to have a whole list of these things. Anywhere between 3 and 5 is plenty for a company. If a company has 3 or 5 core competencies, that's really, really good. So don't expect a long list, but you have to find out what they're really good at. Now, let's have a look at some of the main points. So as I said, this is the core competence of the corporation. Pralat and Hamill. Okay, these are the two academics who have published this article, and it is, as I said, it's highly cited, really influential paper. This is where it all began. So I want you to read this. I want you to read this article. It's up on your contents page. So, you know, have a read through it, right? There's really important stuff in it, really important stuff in it. And whoever in your group is doing the competencies element of it, I want you to read it, right? I want you to pay a lot of attention down here. So this idea of identifying core competencies and losing them. So it talks about the 3 tests that can be applied to identify the core competency in a company, right? So first of all, the core competency provides potential access to a wide variety of markets. So whatever it is that they excel at across the organization, it has to give them access to a variety of markets. To give you an example here. The second test that they do is that a core competence should make a significant contribution to the perceived customer benefits of the end product. All right. Second, a core competence should make a significant contribution to the perceived customer benefits of the end product. And then finally, they talk about the last test is that a core competence should be difficult for competitors to imitate. And it will be difficult if it is a complex harmonization of individual technology and production skills. In other words, if this is embedded across the organization, it becomes very difficult to replicate. So it's not just like a piece of technology, which can be easily replicated. Now, on that, I'm going to show you something else that really drives us home this point, but I want you to read this article, right? It's really powerful. Let's have a look at the next article. Okay, so this is the next article that I want you to have a look at to help you understand this idea of core competencies, right? So this is uploaded as well, right? So, and the part that I want you to focus in on is just here. Now, what we have here is the concept of core competencies tends to be confused with core technologies and or capabilities. Core technologies are a component part of core competencies. Core competency results when firms learn how to harmonize multiple technologies. That's the point that I was making earlier on. The idea of a harmonized combination of multiple resources and skills. That's what I'm talking about. For example, consider miniaturization, which has been a unique signature of Sony. Miniaturization requires core technologies such as microprocessors, miniature power sources, power management, packaging, and manufacturing. It certainly also requires knowledge and understanding of user-friendly design and knowledge of ergonomics. In addition, miniaturization is a result of deep sensitivity to emerging lifestyles. A core competency does not represent just technical capabilities in microprocessors or packaging or passive components. It also means understanding how to exploit lifestyle knowledge using electronics. This is the key. This is the key to it. The point I want to stress is that it's not just technical capabilities that matter. What matters is the creative bundling of multiple technologies and customer knowledge and intuition and managing them as a harmonious whole. That's a core competency. Now, that's not easy to replicate. Okay, that's not easy to replicate. Now, and this brings us very nicely into some of these points here. The core competency can be identified by applying 3 simple tests. Is it a significant source of competitive differentiation? Okay, does it provide a unique signature to the organization like miniaturization for Sony or user friendliness at Apple? Now, when you get into this idea of differentiation, which we'll go into in depth in a number of weeks' time, but for now, if a company differentiates itself from its competition, it needs to do so, and the difference in their product or service has to be, one, important to the consumer. Right? It has to be important. Whatever's different about your product has to be important. It has to be distinctive. It has to stand out. They should be able to identify the difference. It has to be superior than the competitors' products or features. Right? In addition, you've also got to think about, is the differentiation, is the product that's differentiated, i.e. if it's different than the competitors, will it be profitable? No point having loads of these fancy bells and whistles if it's not profitable. And this also brings you into the point is it affordable? Can people actually buy this? Is there a market for it? There's another one called preemptiveness, but we'll get into that later on, all right? We don't need to worry about that for now. But what I want you to focus on here is this idea is it a significant source of competitive differentiation? Is the core competency important? Is it distinctive? Is it superior? Is it profitable? Is it affordable? And so on and so forth. And these are nice examples here. The miniaturization for Sony or the user friendliness of Apple. I don't know. I don't think any of you remember. You know what I'll do? I'll try and root it out over the next couple of days, and I'll show it to you next week. A number of years ago, Sony released the Sony mini disc player. Now, not only did I have the Sony mini disc player, but I also had the Sony stereo system that had these mini discs. And you know, you can see how small these little discs were. And it came at a time when there was this big trend, and Sony, you know, Sony are really good at identifying trends and actually, you know, being ahead of the curve with these. And they noticed this idea of miniaturization going, you know, coming along and coming forward. And they got in with the mini disc. Now, so it so happened that MP3s are about to launch, so that, you know, ended up blowing the mini disc market out of the water. But the point that I'm making is very focused on miniaturization. Okay, the second sort of question or test is, does it transcend a single business? Does it cover a range of businesses, both current and new? Now, the thing about here is there's things called strategic business units, SBUs, right? SBUs are specifically, you know, elements within a business that do a thing for a thing. So you have a strategic business unit will be focusing in on one marketplace. It's not, this core competency cannot be just confined to one of those strategic business units. It has to permeate the entire organization. All right. Does it transcend a single business? Is it hard for competitors to imitate? And this is what I was saying earlier on. It has to be hard for it to be imitated. It's hard for someone to visit Matsushita or Sony and come back and outline why they are good at manufacturing or miniaturization, respectively. Competence permeates the whole. This is what I'm saying. The competence permeates the whole organization, and it represents tacit learning in an organization. That tacit learning. Have a look at that. Google tacit learning. Powerful, powerful stuff, right? The difference between technology and competence is that technology can be standalone, design a very large scale integration. Competence, on the other hand, is getting consistently high yields in VLSI. This transcends design capabilities. The process of converting good designs into high yields requires that multiple levels, the shop floor and product development engineers, right, across the way, and multiple functions, application engineers and manufacturers work very closely. Right, so good flow of communication across the organization. A lot of the understanding and learning is tacit. It's not formal, right? It's not formal learning. And the recognition that competence represents tacit as well as explicit learning, and its cumulative knowledge base is involving a large number of people, is critical to understanding core competencies. Technical capabilities as standalone skills are not the key to understanding core competencies. Competence is embedded in the whole organization. Now, gives you a few more examples here. The miniaturization of Sony, network management, AT&T. You also have this idea of user friendliness with Apple, and so on. Right? Often core competencies are confused with capabilities. Capabilities are in some cases prerequisites to being in a business. I mean, prerequisite means it has to be there before you can have a core competency. For example, just-in-time delivery is a prerequisite to be a tier 1 supplier in the auto industry. Now, you'll probably learn just-in-time in one of your management classes. So if you haven't at this stage, you should. Okay? It is the price one has to pay to get into the game. Capability. Sometimes they're called threshold competencies. You just need to have it to be able to compete. If one is a gambler, one may call it table stakes. Capability is crucial for survival, but unlike a core competency, does not confer any specific differential advantage over other competitors in that industry. Now, what I like about this article as well is just here, right? You like this. This helps cement it, particularly for people who are inclined with maths, right? So, it also takes into account the corporate governance, right? And it gives you a little sort of formula. And we conceptualize, here it is, we conceptualize competence as follows. Competence equals technology, multiply corporate governance, multiply by collective learning. You can have a look here, right? And what it does is it goes through an example of this, right? And it provides you with a worked example. So for example, let's say there's a company that's really good at technology and they have 1,000 units of technology. However, let us assume that the various businesses within the corporation do not work together. Let's give them 20 units for the governance process. Capability to work across the business and the functional unit boundaries. Let us also assume that in this firm, the capacity for collective learning is low. So let us give them 5 units for this dimension. Using the formula above, we now have an overall competence score of 100,000 units. Right, the multiplication, right? Work out the numbers. Now what they do is they move into another company and they have 200 units for technology, 500 for collective learning, and 100 units for governance. That gives them 10 million. And the point here is this idea of collective learning, this idea of harmonizing the knowledge across all aspects of the business is what separates a core competency from just, being good at something. Okay. The message is clear. Investments in technology, if they are not in tandem, accompanied by investments in governance and creation of learning environment at all levels in the organization, will remain under leveraged. So the logical point of leverage for Western firms resides in investments to improve the quality of organization. And they go on to give you loads more examples down here to help you understand it in greater detail. All right. So that's an example of core competencies. These will be really, really important concepts to be able to bring into that section of your assignment. You have to identify what are the core competencies within the firm that you're examining. Now, a core competency can also be something got to do with the human side of things, as we talked about. Let's have a look at that now. Okay, so again, another really high cited paper. All right, another paper that has made an impact in this field, competency in the 21st century. Now, again, I've highlighted some areas here. So as we've seen, again, this gives you just background information around this, but what is a competency? A competency is defined as a capability or ability. And we understand from the 1990 and the 1993 paper that a core competency is really where we're at. It's not just good to talk about competencies. We need to talk about core competencies because that's what separates businesses apart, is having these core competencies. Right, so let's move on. So a capability or ability, we know it's even more than that, and what qualifies in the tests that are involved in that. These things can be human. So for example, here are some threshold competencies. A threshold competency is nothing more than you just need to have these to be able to get onto the pitch to play. So expertise and experience is a threshold level competency. Knowledge, right? Knowledge is a threshold competency. An assortment of basic cognitive competencies such as memory and deductive reasoning are threshold competencies. And they talk about that they have other forms of competence such as cognitive competencies, system thinking and pattern recognition, emotional intelligent competencies, including self-awareness, self-management competencies such as emotional self-awareness and emotional self-control, and social intelligent competencies, including social awarenesses and relationship management competencies such as empathy and teamwork. All right. Emotional and social and cognitive intelligent competencies. These are all sort of the human side of human competencies. And again, these are the ones that may, differentiate a company from a competitor and help them achieve a big advantage in the marketplace. All right. Other ones include things like influence, inspiration, leadership, and being excellent at being able to manage change, being a change catalyst. All right. So again, the paper finished up saying, look, these things aren't necessarily always born within us, but these things help, can be developed. All right. So that's like sort of a bit of a silver lining to all this.